Okay, and welcome back. So thanks again to Professor Khan for the last session. So I'm joined now by Melissa Semcer, who was previously the Deputy Director of California's Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, or Energy Safety for short, and is now a Principal Consultant and owner of CWE Strategies. So Melissa, thank you very much for joining the Wildfire Frontiers Summit today. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. It's good to be here again. I got to be here last time you all did a summit, so it's fun to be back again. Just to provide a little bit of context on me and my company. So yeah, I was the deputy director. I was appointed by Governor Newsom and helped build up the wildfire mitigation plan regulatory framework that exists in California. And after a few years of doing that, I saw a real need to support other states and utilities that were coming along on their journey and were not quite as far as California had gotten. And I also recognized and realized that we were lucky in California. We had utilities that were well resourced and had the ability to do the latest and greatest technologies and risk modeling and to bring on wildfire mitigation PMOs and things like that. And, I had a team of 60 to 80 underneath me undertaking wildfire mitigation plan evaluations, wildfire mitigation plan compliance. And a lot of other states, there's maybe 2 or 3, sometimes if they're lucky, 4 people at the PUC who are involved on that side, on the regulatory side. And so I saw a real need to take what we had learned and figure out how we could apply it in other states, in recognition that other states and other utilities simply couldn't and shouldn't necessarily do what was being done in California. So that I've been spending the last number of years doing that, and I've been fortunate to work in states throughout the West with utilities and also with technology companies that are in this space. So I've gotten a really broad view of of all different sides of this equation. And it's been very valuable for just being able to help others along their journey. So the purpose of today, it's really, I'm putting my regulatory hat back on in a way, and I'm using it to have a conversation mainly targeted towards utilities and mainly targeted towards utilities who are earlier in their journey about what I have seen as the pitfalls along the way of a wildfire mitigation plan and how the document can be useful for you as a utility. And I'm going to walk you through some of those findings. And for the utilities, I know there's some folks on here from the utilities that have been here for a while longer. Some of these still exist in the wildfire mitigation plans in other states as well that are further along their journey. So hopefully there's a little nugget for something that everyone here can take. Let me see. All right. So I want to start with what a WMP is not. And I think it's really important to ground ourselves in this because whenever I see a WMP come in, it has not mattered which state, there's a predictable trajectory that the WMPs take in their maturity. And there's a particular way that they get formatted and presented. And it's fundamentally, I see it being presented as 3 major things, of which I don't believe it's any of them. It's not all or nothing. It's a little bit all of them, but bear with me here for a second. So the first thing is it's not a compliance document. So how most WMPs are written is a state will have either a statute or regulations that will have essentially a laundry list of what needs to be included in a WMP. Describe your vegetation management program, describe your decision making with risk, describe your asset inspection program. You all know that, right? Your grid hardening program. All of these things are a laundry list of essentially this is what needs to be in a WMP. And a WMP comes in and lists and responds to those statutes and says, this is what we do. And I'd just like you to take with you for a moment that it's really not useful as that. It's not useful to the regulator, and it's not really useful to the utility when it's just a kind of story of this is what we do, and this is how many, trees we're going to cut, or this is how many inspections we're going to do. And it's just that. It's also not, I would say, a public relations document or your marketing piece or your explanation piece to your customers is what I mean by this. So I've seen many plans come through. They're usually, when they start, somewhere between 100 and 200 pages, and they have a lot of description that a member of the public might find overwhelming. It's probably too in the weeds for them, but it lacks the information that a regulator needs to be able to make a sound decision in whether they feel comfortable putting ratepayer dollars behind what it is that the utility is doing. So it becomes a document that's trying to be for everyone that ends up being for no one. And so I always recommend build a PowerPoint presentation for your public, for your customers. Even better, as you get further along, allow customers to be able to build a web portal that they can put their address in and understand what's happening around them as far as mitigations that might be happening that year. But explaining at a very high level what a vegetation management program is, the clearances, all of that, it's maybe too much for them and not enough for the regulator. Despite the fact that it's usually being presented in with a request for money, I would also say it's not really your GRC or other funding document. In a lot of PUCs, it's being handled separately. Most PUCs I'm seeing, it's being handled separately, that the plan is being reviewed for whether it's a good plan. And it's not necessarily being reviewed at that moment for the exact dollar ask. Often that's happening separately. And so, but it is the foundation of what will become the ask for the funding. So it needs to have enough information in it, have enough data in it, be sourced enough, resourced enough that it then is the underpinning upon which the ask for the money makes sense when PUCs get to that point. And this one's obvious. It's not a static document. It's always meant to be evolving. It's meant to be living. In my mind, always think of this as a continuous improvement document. It's really a company strategy towards continuous improvement. So I think this is different from how most people approach it. Most utilities I see approach it not so much as a static document, but for the first three, that's absolutely how it tends to get the approach that tends to be the foundation of the WMP. And what that leads to is pitfalls that I've seen. And after this, I'm going to go through some suggestions for how you can think about this and how you can make it really useful for your company. So here's the common pitfalls that I've seen. These may not be all of them. Others might agree or disagree with these, but this is from what I've seen. Often, a WMP becomes a bottom-up approach. So a utility recognizes they have a risk, and they reach out to all of their different areas. If it's a smaller utility, some of these may be the same people. If it's a large utility, these might be programs that really have no interaction with each other or very limited interaction with each other. And they ask the question, what can we do, or what are we already doing, or what can we do just a little bit better to start moving us in this direction? And it comes up and it rolls up, right? So the WMP becomes a list of programs or mitigations that are really rolling up from the bottom without that overarching viewpoint on them. And so they become a little bit of, and I'm being facetious in saying this, but they become a little bit of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think we're far enough along now as an industry that bottom-up approach is not the right approach, even for a utility that's just starting out. And it can lead to what becomes sort of a large ask to the regulator, who then is faced with a large sum of money that ratepayers may be on the hook for, with a whole host of programs that maybe don't have the teeth behind them. And so I always recommend to utilities, start from the top, don't start from the bottom. But it's very common to start from the bottom, roll up, and present a WMP. The other pitfall I see, and I talked about this a little bit, is the what without the why. And this is where, from a regulatory standpoint, but also for even the buy-in for your own teams, what are you doing, but why are you doing it? What is the rationale behind it, right? We are doing 3-year cycles, and then we're moving towards an off cycle with vegetation management. We're undergrounding this many lines. We're going to start phasing in drone inspections or start inspections at all. We're going to do ground inspections this way. Why? what is the rationale, what is the data, even if the data is very light, or even if it's, this is what we see other utilities do, we don't have the data yet, but this is how we're going to start getting the data. That is a key piece that I see missing over and over and over again, is with the why. And so it's this large ask. This will help us reduce our wildfire risk. How is that supported? How do you know? That then couples into number 3, which often in the beginning, there's big asks for money with low commitment, right? So the utility, and understandably, is facing a large risk, comes with a large strategy, feels the pressure to have a really cohesive and large strategy, but doesn't really have the data to back it yet. And so there's a lot of kind of wishy-washy or weak kind of commitments. We may do this. We will target this. We'll have a range and a very large range from X to Z, or WM to Z, right? We can cover a large risk or a large range and we'll be okay. And that really gets problematic because it's an ask from ratepayers to fund a large amount of work, but not necessarily a commitment to do that work. And a plan without commitment is just a piece of paper. It's just a paperweight, right? It's not very useful to anybody. It's the commitment that comes behind it. I do want to put an asterisk under this one and just say that I think commitments can go overboard. I think that there should be flexibility when a utility sets a target. I think we do have to allow for updates of risk models and learnings. And, I think that that's a tough dynamic between regulator and utility. That maybe some states have gone too far on in terms of holding the utilities to very rigid targets. But there's somewhere a sweet spot between the rigidity year over year and the large range, or we may do this, but we don't commit to it. And that leads me into number 4, which is asks beyond the maturity. So any utility starting out is going to have a limited understanding of its risk. Any utility who's further along in this journey will tell you that data is everything. And fundamentally, when you start looking under the hood of your utility, you likely don't have the data. You likely have multiple systems that don't talk to each other. You might have systems that are duplicative. You might have people out in the field using different systems. You really might not have good information. But the utilities will then come in with a pretty large ask, and it's usually, again, the key asks are undergrounding, covered conductor, and veg management, right? These are the big cost asks that most utilities make. And I always advise, maybe not yet. Maybe there's some interim steps that you take, and there's the operational mitigations that we know can be really effective. And maybe you want to wait till you're a little bit further along in your understanding of your risk and that you have better data and better systems in place before you do some of those big asks. Because what we've also seen is, as risk models mature, as more information comes in, what you understand to be your high risk areas may change. Your highest risk circuits may become your bottom 50% of circuit segments or circuits the next time you do it. And then what, right? How does the regulator stand behind that? And how does the utility come back and ask for additional money? It's just a rub. Another thing, and this is related to the bottom-up approach, is I see compilation without coordination. So this is an opportunity, and I'll share this next. This is one of the few opportunities I've seen for the company to really work across all of its different components in different areas and bring together a holistic strategy. But most of our organizations are all in our various silos, right? And we don't speak to each other. And so what we think is really important in ours, somebody else thinks is really important theirs, and it doesn't come up together of what are we actually going to do here, and how are we going to make the decision, which gets to the next piece of decisions without governance. I have run into this so many times. Who makes the decision about what goes into the WMP? Who makes that decision? It's not one person, but so many people are often left with, we don't know. We don't actually know who the decision maker is here. And so again, this is a cross utility function. And so what I've seen work best is governance committees, right, that come together that have representatives from all of the different areas that are touched on this. And then they vote, right? But that's great for the big decisions. But what about the little decisions? Who owns the language in the WMP? Who owns the language? Like, is it, if you have a project management office, are they writing it? Or is your grid hardening section writing it? Or is your emergency response section writing it? Who gets to say what stays and goes? That's a really tough nut to crack. And I've seen that over and over again, that it's extremely hard and it's very challenging. And so to get ahead of that and say, who makes our big D decisions, but also who makes our little d decisions to make sure this gets across and tells the story that we need it to tell. Another piece, and this is kind of related to the bottom-up approach, moving the whole chessboard instead of the piece. So again, I see WMPs come in and it's everything. We're doing everything. But when you do that, a lot of times you advance everything a little bit, but maybe you would have been better off moving that strategic chess piece or two on your board and coming up with what are the 2 or 3 things that we really need to do that will be what gets us far over this next year or this next 3 years or whatever your period is. And then finally, and this is related, again, these are all related to each other, but seen over and over again, more than you'd think, where when you get into it, when you get into where the work is targeted, especially the grid hardening work, it's not targeted at the highest risk segments or circuits, whichever level the utility is able to go at. It's not necessarily clear what the baseline is, and the work, I think, there's reasons for why that happens, but it's very, very hard on the regulatory side to evaluate the validity of a plan that isn't targeting its work towards its highest 20% riskiest areas. And if those areas have reasons for why the hardening doesn't make sense, maybe you do have a risk spend efficiency methodology and it's less than 1, or the BCR doesn't pan out, or for whatever reason, that it's just not going to work mechanically. Fine, then what are you doing? What are you doing on your understanding? And taking that back a little bit further, having a list of your highest risk circuits, if you're at the circuit level, or ideally you're getting, more granular than that. But even if you're starting at the circuit level, these are our highest 20% risk circuits. This is what we're doing to address it. We're not doing hardening this year. We're going to focus on PSPS. We feel like operational mitigations are enough here. We need more data. We do think this one needs to be undergrounded in the next 3 years. Whatever it is, just have that plan laid out. Okay, and then I really push on this when I work with the utilities that I work with, that there are a lot of internal benefits to a WMP that I feel like get lost because they tend to be these public relations and more compliance-focused documents. And I think it's an amazing opportunity to look under the hood of your own utility and use it as your guiding document. So I do think it can become the North Star of the company in terms of what it's going to do for wildfire. It can really become where anybody in the company can go and understand the company's priorities and understand what we're doing and understand how we're going to measure that we did that and see that clearly. And that's, again, it's a place where you can focus priorities. I really, really think that, again, that bottom-up approach, what are the 3 things you're doing this year or this 3-year plan? What are the 3 to 5 areas that you're really going to grow, and why? Why are those the areas? And why should you focus your ratepayer dollars there instead of somewhere else, right? Don't just do it all. What are really the priorities? As I said before, it's a really strong opportunity to cut across silos. It's one of the few I've seen. And I don't see enough utilities taking advantage of that, of really engaging in the dialogue. I think they are as best they can, but there's more that can be done, especially newer utilities, to engage across the silos and talk. Formalizing and documenting your decision-making, right? What are we doing? Not what are we thinking about doing or what might we do, but what are we doing and why? So that any person in your utility can pick up that document and say, this is what we're doing this 3 years. This is our North Star for our area. We have it documented. We own it. We know what's going on. As I mentioned before about data, it's an amazing opportunity to get to know your system. And I think In some ways, although it's painful, it's the opportunity that I think a lot of utilities have needed to really understand what assets they have, what information they don't have, because everyone's trying to build the utilities of the future, right? The utilities that are all needing upgrades, regardless of wildfire, regardless of climate, are all needing upgrades. Well, we got to know what we have. We got to know how we collect information. We've got to get past the way our data conflicts with each other and all the manual nature and crunching of numbers and different sources of truth. It's an amazing opportunity to invest in your data management. It's a great opportunity to connect operations and planning, right? A lot of times those work very separately, and anyone will tell you they don't necessarily listen or talk to each other. Well, you need both to do this. It's, again, a strategy where you can have not just that this is what we're doing, but this is how we do it. This is behind the scenes, how we measure and validate what we've done. This is our record of evidence that we're going to use so that when we say we've done X number of inspections, this is how we say we have done them. Or we are going to, complete all of our veg management work in the high fire threat areas before wildfire season. How are we going to validate that? Or we have open work orders in this area. And so we're thinking about calling a PSPS. Do we know for sure that those orders are open or not? It's an opportunity to standardize processes. These are some of the things we've seen, is that you'll have different folks doing inspections differently. You'll have different contractors really doing their veg management work differently. And that can really open you up, right? A utility up to having an error occur. So it can be an opportunity to revisit and go back to the drawing board. And then we've seen a lot of creating efficiencies. How do you do your work? Do you fix when you find in some cases? Do you bundle work to do high risk and low risk work together? There's just an opportunity, an amazing opportunity to go back to the drawing board. And that's where I come back to really of just the slow down to speed up, right? I know it's tempting, and it's also, there's a lot of pressure to have that everything WMP out the gates. And I think that the slow down to go fast mentality can really benefit here, where maybe we need to learn more and get more systems in place and understand more before we go for that big ask. It's not to say that big ask isn't needed or necessary, but let's make sure we don't ask for it too soon and end up being inefficient as a company and potentially having reputational harm and things like that for the decisions that we have made. So again, I think it can be really thought about very differently than a compliance document, and it can be as valuable to the internal as it is to the external. And the last thing I want to talk about, I'm trying to keep this relatively short so I can take questions as well, but I've had a lot of questions too about, well, we can't do a risk spend efficiency, or we don't have a methodology to do cost benefit analysis yet. Okay, fair. That takes a lot of data. There's a lot of states don't have any kind of required methodology of their utilities. That's not something that they necessarily have had to do. But you can think about the generalized, even if you can't calculate it to a number, to a very precise number, is there a way that you can present, when you present a WMP to the regulator, that you can present it where you say, we understand there are high risk and low risk reducing activities. We understand there are high cost and low cost reducing activities. Where do the things that we're asking for fall? And this is just a simple 9x9 matrix about what you might do, right? Depending on where this falls. Where do the mitigations themselves fall? And then even if you can get down to the circuit, right? Like what for example, at your circuit or circuit segment ideally, but just say at your circuit and you put a subject matter expert on it and you come up with some piece of it that you want to underground. Well, maybe the cost in that place is actually medium and it's not high because it's not going to be one of your more expensive spans to underground. And maybe the risk reduction is so high that it starts to become something that you sequence, as opposed to maybe you're doing it very, very, very strategically, right? So, and it's kind of bringing those together. So being able to just put points on something like this, or putting your top 20% of risk, your top 20% of risk, however many circuits or circuit segments that is, what you're planning on doing and plotting them on this, so that there's some, and then what is your thinking on that? What is your validation for that? What are you using and relying upon, even if it's not the best data? right? Because you don't have the best data yet. What are you relying upon? What are the assumptions underneath that to figure out where you go on this path, on this matrix? It can go a long way, and it can really go a long way too, I think, to thinking about it internally, even if you can just map a little bit while you're on the path to, risk spend efficiency. Because some of the things I've seen, yeah, people already asked questions. I saw that just go up. But some of the things I've seen are arguments that any catastrophic fire is extremely expensive and will outstrip the investments. And that's true if you have the catastrophic fire, but not everybody's going to have the catastrophic fire. They're not going to have the catastrophic fire every year, right? So it's actually like that's like the broadest place you can come from. And then the most in the weeds place is this circuit segment does this, this much risk reduction calculated with incredibly sophisticated machine learning models, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a big space in between that utilities can start to communicate as they build this expertise, or communicate why they don't necessarily need to build this expertise. Not every utility needs to have super sophisticated risk models and the super sophisticated risk spend efficiency or cost benefit analyses. Not everybody needs that, and not every regulator needs that either. So with that, that's all I have. I just thought I'd kind of put that out there, and then I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them in the chat.
Okay, yeah, and folks, you'll see on the right-hand side there's a Q&A tab, so you can just click that and post a question there if you have one for Melissa. I have a question for you, Melissa.
Yep, go ahead.
So you sort of finished on an interesting point there, which is that not all utilities will have an event, like a major catastrophic wildfire. So how does a utility in one of these sort of vanguard locations that hasn't previously been exposed to wildfire risk and now is, quantify, the probable or the impact of something that may or may not happen?
It's a good question. And there are places you can look to get data about your particular area to, first of all, has your utility had any ignitions, right? Do you track that? That's step one. Do you track your ignitions? If not, now's the time to start. But do your outages have any kind of coding on them on ignitions? And then trying to overlay that with weather data to try to figure out, did any of these happen on a high risk day? And if they did, potentially they could have, right? They could have resulted in a catastrophic fire. They didn't, but they could. There's also just public information that's out there. There's different universities that have good information about the fires that have happened over the last 100 years in your location or in your service territory. And that can give you an idea too of what's happened, where have those fires been? How big have they burned? You can rely on some of the damage estimates from some of the big fires that we've had, but I always say take that with a real grain of salt, because I think, relying on fires in Los Angeles, if you are a very different location with a different population profile, in terms of how dense you are and things like that, it's not going to be the same. It's just not going to be as costly. So there are places you can go to start.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So a couple of questions. There's one question here from Bruce Wald, which is, can the concepts and approaches you shared apply to all risks beyond wildfire?
Yeah, yes. I think that's a really important piece, is that, and I think in the West, we've focused on wildfire to the detriment so far of some of the other hazards that we face. And, the conversation is just starting and has not really gotten there yet of what are the co-benefits, right? So the main co-benefits that are being looked at are reliability, because if you do PSPS or you do sensitivity settings, right, you're going to have more outages. And so how do you mitigate for that? But most of these investments also have other benefits, right? They might help you during winter storms. Maybe they're going to help you during hurricanes. So yeah, I think all of these can be looked at for any hazard that you face. And I think, ideally where this goes is we just have a hazard mitigation plan. and we look at everything holistically, and we create a very similar idea that we do for the WMP. We do it for all of our hazards. The challenging part, of course, about wildfire is that for the most part, your assets are not going to be the cause of the problem. When there's a flood, they're going to be the recipient of the problem. The same with the hurricane. And so that's the thing you have to parse out, is that consequence piece of the failure of the asset, which is not necessarily there for the other hazards. But I do think that this method of thinking and this way of working across the company and the data and all of that can absolutely be used in the same way.
Thanks, Melissa. Another question from me. So there's the NERC Wildfire Best Practices report that's been released in its draft form. Just curious, between sort of state PUCs and then the national regulator, whether you see, is that sort of like a healthy balance between the two? Is it a friction? Is there competing priorities between the state level and the federal level? Just any sort of thoughts you might have on the NERC Wildfire Best Practices report and how it fits in, given your experience, with the CPU.
Yeah, I mean, I think
PUC. So.
I think it captures some things well, and I think other areas maybe not as well. What I feel like is missing is that we have the utility side doing its thing and the regulatory side doing its thing. And when you start to roll it up to the national level, you start to lose a lot of the nuance. And so, in trying to create a strategy for everyone, you create maybe a strategy for no one. And it can be like a starting place, right? But I think it has to go deeper than that and go to the states and go to the utilities. And I still hope that someday the regulators and the utilities are going to come together and are going to really talk about what is the best way to handle this, balancing affordability, balancing risk, balancing litigation risk, balancing all those things. What do we need to do? But yeah, I mean, I think their usefulness is helpful but limited on both fronts.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. So I can't see any more questions coming through. So I think we can close this session here. I just want to say, Melissa, thank you so much for coming on and presenting today and sharing your experience with everyone.
Yeah,
if
thanks for
people want
having
to get in contact, what's the best way to speak with you?
Oh yeah, I have my email on there. melissa.semcer@cwestrategies.com. Feel free to reach out with any questions.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks again, Melissa. And to the folks in the audience, the next session is going to be with Pacific Gas and Electric and also Arcos. This session's scheduled to start in 6 minutes' time. So again, this session will now close. You'll get backed out to the home screen. So you're just looking for the session that includes Sean Holder, scheduled to start in 5 minutes' time. So with that, thanks again, Melissa. Really appreciate you joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.